So in 2017, I got a phone call on my phone while I was at work, and it said the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on, and I was like, what the, actually it said it in German, I remember, for whatever, technology. But German's similar enough to English. I was like, the Church of Jesus, La Kirche, the Kirche, Die Kirche, whatever. So I answer the phone and I was like, hello, this is Isaac. And a woman says, hi, is this Isaac Hess? And I say, yes. And she says, I'm the secretary of Elder Chistofferson, and he's wondering if he could speak with you. Do you have a moment? So to explain who this was,
please. The
LDS Church is led by 15 men that they consider prophets, seers, and revelators. Okay, there's 3 that serve in like the first, what they call the first presidency, which is, so it's the president of the church and his 2 counselors. That's 3. And then there's the quorum of the 12 apostles. Okay, so and all 15 of them are referred, the church believes like they're prophets, seers, and revelators. That's like their official title. And so this was one of the apostles calling me on the phone. And I was like, what
is happening?
I mean, this is totally bizarre.
What would that be like? Give us a kind of Catholic context for this. Would that be like just some rando getting a call from Cardinal Pell or something like, not Cardinal Pell, but Someone who's alive?
It would be. That'd
be really weird.
Yeah. It's hard to say exactly because of how revered these men are, Like the best I could say would be like, I would say all 15 of them in many ways are kind of like at the level of the Pope.
Yeah, it's 15. That's not
like,
many.
There's like 15. Imagine there were like the Pope and he had 14 other people that were Pope like him, kind of.
Yeah.
Yes, there may be one who's like the actual president of the church and he's the most revered.
A patriarch.
But all 15 of them are like so revered. So to get a phone call, I mean, I had like twice or 3 times in my life met some of them before, just like a moment, like shake their hand when they came to some big meeting I was at, right? And even that's considered a great honor to like shake the hand of an apostle.
I don't want to derail your story, but I was asked to give a big talk in Salt Lake City. I think it was in Salt Lake City in Utah. And it was this massive Mormon conference. There must have been 5,000 people there.
Yeah.
And the prophet couldn't do it, so they asked me.
Oh my goodness. Are you serious?
Yeah, and it wasn't a Mormon gathering. It was actually an anti-porn conference.
Yeah.
But
what year was this?
Oh, gee. Way before I started doing interviews about Mormonism. I'll tell you that. That must have been about 6 to 10 years ago, sometime in there. And I gave this big talk on pornography. But I was a little like, I'm so sorry, I'm not
the prophet.
People.
Yeah.
Well, not the prophet, sorry.
Oh, but someone in one of the apostles.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure that was how it went.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, sure. So I duck into a conference room at work. And she's like, I'm connecting you now. And then boom, the next thing I hear is like, hi, is this Isaac? This is Todd Chistofferson. And I was just like, my mind was like, and I was like, what is going on? I was like, hi. And he said, do you remember writing a letter to me? And then I remembered. So about a year or 2 before, in one of these moments of like crisis in my faith, he had given like a talk in what we call general conference. We call them a talk. It's like a sermon. We call them talks in Mormonism. And it had like really spoken to me. And so I'd sent him a letter, kind of sort of being like, hey, I'm really struggling with my faith. I know you probably get letters from people all the time. And, and I said, I don't really expect you to respond, but I just wanted you to know whatever, I'm struggling, etc. And and this is like 2 years before. So like he calls me 2 years later. He's like, I finally got to your letter or whatever. And he's just like, I just thought it was such a lovely thing. He's like, and I'm so sorry. I was wondering if you wanted to talk. I was like, I would love to. But at this time, I kind of was in a good spot with my faith, and because, I mentioned I was kind of up and down. So it was during one of my up periods. And so I said, I don't really feel like the same urgency that I had. He's like, well, the least I could do is have lunch with you. Why don't you come up to Salt Lake and have lunch with me? And I thought, absolutely. Like how often, this is such a privilege. Like I remember, here's some context. I remember telling a relative of mine about this. And he said something like, I would walk all day and all night if I had to in order to have lunch with one of these men, And I was like, well, I had, I got invited. I took the car.
in Mormon culture, in Salt Lake City, are these fellas recognizable?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. People will walk up to them. If they're like out in public, like people will walk up to them and like shake their hand, I mean, anywhere they go, I mean, there's enough Latter-day Saints that like these people, if they're just in the airport, people will walk up to them, you know, you address them as elder. And so you're just like, oh, Elder Chistofferson, like, I just want to meet you, you know, I'm a Latter-day Saint, whatever, right? They're very, very revered.
So you went out to lunch somewhere publicly or?
No, I went to, they have the place where the highest church leaders work is called the Church Administration Building. It's this beautiful old early 20th century, I think is when it was built. Maybe 19th century building, you know, marble columns, beautiful floors, ornate, just, you know, and they have like a little cafeteria in there. And so he just had me, that's where he works. So I just showed up to lunch and he invited me in and we got some food and we sat down at a table. You know, there were like 3 other apostles sitting at other tables and like deep conversation. I met the man who's now the president of the church. He was there. His name's President Nelson. And so like he's the current prophet. I met him during that visit and we just had like a lovely chat for like an hour or two where I kind of told him my story. I told him about how you know, at this point, 3 of my brothers had left the church but I was still kind of hanging on, right? I even told him about my interest in orthodoxy and kind of the reasons at that time that I was still LDS. And so it was just a nice conversation. Like he didn't share, I almost wished that I had gone at a time when I was in more turmoil because then I would have gotten more kind of like spiritual advice from him. But it was more just like a kind of get to know you, talk to him for a while. But it was just this crazy experience. And it actually, weirdly enough, kind of ended up precipitating my finally leaving the church. And here's how it happened.
Well, before that, how did he respond to you saying you were looking into orthodoxy?
Fine. He was like, you know, there's so much beauty in these other faiths, you know, and he totally understood why, like, I would have some attraction to that. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a negative thing. Okay. We just kind of swapped some stories and, you know, kind of got to know him on a personal level. He was such a kind and good person. You know, sometimes within like the ex-Mormon community, people will like be like, oh, these men are evil. And like, they don't actually believe, they're just like putting one on. And all I can say is like, when I met him and met others, and I had multiple interactions with him after this too, that like, he just seemed such a sincere, kind, you know, you talked about how great Latter-day Saints are. Like he seemed to embody all of the best things in that culture. And so I had that lunch and, you know, every now and then I would exchange a letter with him or something like that. And then that fall, he gave me another call and asked if he could share my story in his next general conference address that was going to happen in October. And I was like kind of blown away by this, you know, because twice a year, like I said, they have this huge meeting. It lasts for a whole weekend. They do like meetings on Saturday and on Sunday. It's broadcast to the entire world. They call it General Conference. And every member of the church leadership gives us a talk, a sermon to just about whatever they think church members should know or should hear. And Latter-day Saints take this really seriously because these men are prophets, seers, and revelators. So whatever they speak on is like, for the next like 6 months in Sunday school, that's what they study, is what they said at the last conference. And so I was like, wow. And they frequently will share, you know, stories of individuals, faith promoting stories, that sort of thing. So I was really honored to be someone whose story he shared, right? And so my wife and I went up to the conference. We got to like sit in like these special guest seats near the front. And it was just a cool experience. You know, I had more pictures with him and with some other apostles. And it just was kind of this surreal thing. So he did that. And when it was over, I shared it with my family, right? Especially with like my siblings who had left. I was like, hey, you know, because it actually talked about them a little bit. Talked about how, you know, he's sort of like he didn't use my name in this story, but he's like a young man, had several siblings who left the church and, you know, they tried to get him to go too, but he stayed strong, you know, just kind of like that sort of thing. So I shared that with some of my brothers, and my oldest brother kind of emailed me back and said, you know, he's like, you know, I would just love to be able to just talk to you about this. Like, he's like, we've never talked really about my faith transition and about Mormonism. And, you know, he's like, I'll admit it's kind of weird to be the bad guy in a general conference talk. And he's like, I would just love to talk. And I just thought, yeah, let's talk. Like, he and I we were so close growing up, and when he left the LDS faith, it really kind of put a rift in our relationship. And I thought, yeah, I want to try to connect with him. Like, let's do it. So we picked a night, and I drove up to Salt Lake just so we could just kind of chat friendly about the church. And it was a really good conversation. Like, he wasn't mean. He wasn't like disrespectful, but he like challenged me, right? About the faith and the things that I had kind of tried to put to bed over the years. And he was just like,
you had shared those with him then?
No, but he knew what they were. I don't know. There's a certain kind of set of issues that but it was more, the conversation was not so much about those things, but a more sort of like, wouldn't you think that God would want you to like use your mind to investigate, to like understand these things, and to like really know the truth, right? Like, instead of kind of like shutting it off and just being like, no, I can't think about these things. I can't learn about these things. I can't read about these things. He's like, truth is truth. And we should be willing to face even hard truths. And I just remember my heart just being like, yes, right? Like, yes, we should. Like, I don't want to believe in something that I'm afraid to examine. I don't want to believe in something that can't stand up to the just basic questions of being reasonable. Does that make sense?
Complete sense.
You know? And I'm not saying at that time I was like, I'm sure that this doesn't stand up, but I had been unwilling to do that kind of inquiry, right? Because it felt unfaithful to me. Like, I was like, well, I have this testimony, right? I have this witness of the Holy Spirit.
I will say this. I think a lot of people want to talk the talk about, ask the questions. If it's not true, I don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
I would say the majority of us who are intellectually engaged speak that way.
Yes.
But I think most of us haven't been willing to take that and then turn that magnifying glass on the thing we hold most dear.
I remember him asking, and this is a question that lots of kind of like ex-Mormons ask people who are still believing members, something like, if the church wasn't true, would you want to know it?
It's a great question.
You know, like, if it wasn't, would you want to know it or not?
Don't say yes too quickly, right?
And I didn't. I thought for a moment, but then I thought, yes, like I would want to know it because I want truth, you know, I want the truth. And so I kind of left that conversation like really, not so much shaken, but just sort of like, this was really spinning in my head. You know, it was only like a month after I'd had this whole experience where I was like used in general conference. Mm-hmm. And I just kept thinking and thinking about this, you know, and, you know, I was still very much believed in God. And so I was also kind of thinking to myself, like, what does God want me to do? Does God want me to like perform this kind of inquiry? And I kept thinking about verses in scripture about sort of like, you know, Paul talks about the importance of like testing the spirits, right? And in the first epistle of John, he says like, do not trust every spirit, but test the spirits to see which are from God, right? Like, there's this whole theme in the New Testament, not of like discounting religious experience or spiritual experience, but also of testing the experience. Mm-hmm. And I just became like totally convinced that I had to go on this kind of like this journey.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.